As you know, we recorded 4 panels during Changeville 2018. All 4 of these panels featured conversations from experts on important social issues facing us this year and in the years to come. Of the 4 panels, the following one was the one that resonated with me the strongest. This panel was on allyship. The word ally is used all the time in social movements, but many people actually have a hard time defining what being an ally looks like. If you want to learn how to be the best ally you can be, or have ever had questions that you weren't sure how or who to ask, this panel is going to help you answer some of those questions. The panelists include Shawna Potter from the band War on Women, LB Hannas, who works in student affairs at the University of Florida, Will Atkins, the director of UF's Multicultural and Diversity Affairs Department, and the moderator, Dr. Jaron Jones, the co-founder of Narrate. Thanks again to The Bull for hosting us, and Ian Mikish for editing this episode. Just as a heads up, the volume when the audience is speaking on this panel is pretty low, so just wanted you to be aware of that going into it. And also, just a side note, I think we might have missed the first few words that Jaron says, so we're going to jump right in mid-sentence. Here's Jaron.
Whether it's teaching, whether it's an event, I definitely do not like to be the main one talking. And part of the way that I feel that we connect with each other is through discussion, through dialogue, through sharing stories, sharing experiences with one another. So the way we want to operate this panel and this discussion is, if at any point, if something like sparks when you hear someone say anything, raise your hand and let's grow together as a community. If there are questions that you have, feel free to ask them. This is a very safe space. Also, I think everyone on the panel, we love doing this type of work and love communicating and connecting with each other. And so if we can just have an open conversation and really just enjoy this experience, then we did our jobs. I think I'm going to start off with just a few, everyone will just introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of jump right in. I have us opening question if I need to, but if there are people here who might want to start the conversation, we can do that too. So I'll start with who I am and who I represent here. My name is Jaron Jones. I am co-founder of Narrate, along with Brandon Telg. We started Narrate. It's a storytelling organization. It's a nonprofit that we started here in Gainesville, based out of a space where we realized that we had never been asked to share our story up until a class project. And we realized the impact that it had. And so we tried to pay students to share their stories, and we couldn't pay them to share their stories. They were so nervous. So from that space, we realized that we needed to create a space that empowered them. One, they thought it was a catch because no one just wants to hear their story. But lastly, they said that they didn't feel that they had a story that was important enough to share. And so from that, we said we got to make sure this doesn't stay in the classroom. So 5 years later, we're a full nonprofit. We're still here in Gainesville, Florida, and we do anything that we can do and collaborate with as many people as we can to empower people to develop and share their story. And so I'm very honored to be the panel moderator today, but all I'm going to do is facilitate dialogue and questions and comments, and we'll have a great time. All right, so that's a little bit about me, and we have 3 other panelists who are awesome.
My name is LB. I work in the Vice President of Student Affairs office, and I've been in that role for about a year. I previously ran the LGBT office at the University of Florida for 5 years before that. Been in Gainesville since 2011. I came from upstate New York, some kind of a transplant. I worked here for a year while I was a full-time PhD student. So this is my comfort zone in this tight little space. So the work that I do, I also help run a nonprofit called the Consortium of LGBT Higher Ed Professionals. So it's folks that do LGBT work in higher education. Co-founded Gainesville Equality Youth here in town, which is an LGBT youth group. Do a little bit of teaching, and co-run a program called Allyship on campus, which is an intergroup dialogue social justice retreat where we train undergraduate students to lead dialogues with their peers. They're off in the woods doing one this weekend around issues of oppression and injustice, and so ran that program and run it this year. So it's a little bit of my background. I study organizational change in regards to diversity mandates and diversity. So my dissertation is on the SUNY system in New York, so the state higher education system in New York has a very strong diversity mandate from a university, from a system perspective, and then how it impacts campuses and culture when there's a strong mandate from a top-down bureaucracy like that. So I focus on organizational change.
Hey y'all, my name is Will. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I currently serve as the Senior Director for Multicultural and Diversity Affairs at the University of Florida. So within our department, we provide transformative educational experiences really centered around social justice, student development. We provide resources, education, and community that are both identity specific and culturally relevant. And so within our department, we have spaces for Black affairs, Asian Pacific Islander American affairs, Hispanic Latino affairs, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer affairs, which LB mentioned a little bit earlier, being a previous director for. We have some students who do diversity and inclusion education across campus. The Gatorship program that LB advises is also supported from our office in one of our signature programs. So we do a lot around campus focused on social justice, educating students on allyship and different opportunities to engage on campus. Similar to LB as well, I'm also a doctoral student in the College of Education focused on school society and culture. So as I'm moving towards that phase of thinking about a research topic, looking at Black student activism at the University of Florida in the 1970s and doing a counter-narrative of students who withdrew from UF on April 15th, 1971. So it's all kind of coming together, but I'm really excited for what that means for the history of the University of Florida and kind of sharing a narrative that hasn't been fully gathered. So that's it.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shawna. I feel a little underdressed.
You're coming from
We're coming from campus. No, you're
I started the Baltimore chapter of Hollaback, which is an anti-street harassment organization, and street harassment is just sexual harassment in public from strangers. I've been doing this since 2011, and I've been going into spaces, teaching safer space skills, bystander skills, and I'm also in a feminist hardcore band called Raw Women, and so I'm in a lot of different spaces where I am in need of allies, but I also have to make sure that I am a good ally and that I'm not speaking for anyone. You know, if I were to talk about an issue, it has to be genuine and something that's supportive and not speaking over someone or silencing someone. So it's something that's always on my mind, whether I need it or I need to give it in a good way.
And with that, first off, thank you all for sharing. With us having this intimate crowd, that also allows us to engage with one another a little bit more. So this might be something a little unexpected, but if we could go around and everyone introduce themselves and just give a brief, and you can pass if you would like, what you hope to gain from this conversation or what you want to learn more of. It's pretty much open. We just want to get to know each other.
So yeah. So I don't do anything like super important.
That cannot be true.
Right.
That cannot be true.
What I hope to gain from this is because I like to do comedy and I try to start a comedy. I love Gainesville. They're very supportive of comedians and they're very accepting and diverse and they will kick you out if you're an asshole. Where I'm from, it's a very small, backwards town, and it's very difficult to, first of all, get a comedy scene started in general. And the people who have come out to this comedy scene is it's not diverse at all. It's a bunch of straight white men who think sexism's funny and making homophobic remarks is funny. They don't get their language is hurtful or. Anyways, I would like to continue my comedy scene, but I don't want to give a platform to bigotry and hatefulness. So I would like to kind of get resources to represent other people, get other people into the group.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm Celine. I'm a student at UF. I'll be graduating in May.
Yeah.
And genuinely just here to learn more. We're very involved with Frank, which is Changeville, and it ended, and this was a field that I was really interested in. I'm Hispanic, which doesn't, I'm very white and Hispanic, so, and that's my only, I guess, minority of me, but.
It's a fan too.
Yeah. And so I'm just here to learn more about, because I don't know anything, I've not heard of any other minority group, so just learn more about how to be an ally. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm Sean, graphic designer at UF. I have been involved in the LGBT community for many years, but I would like to be a better ally to people outside of my community. I've gained my ally skills from being involved in that community, but I feel like I'm lacking on talking with other people, different races, their background and stuff. So just
I'm a tool. Me and him both drove down from Daytona specifically for the band. He had come here last year. He told me about it. So, just understanding the importance of activism. Me and Jaron had a conversation. Yesterday he was walking by and he got
It's a good combo.
Misunderstandings between two parties. So when you're talking about bridge, what does it really mean to have a bridge? So what are the points? How to create this bridge? So I was thinking about it, last time. Cocktails, but So I work as a full-time researcher in University of Daytona, creation as well. I do full-time research in that. So that's what it's
I'm Randy, and for the music festival, and then figured I wouldn't be doing it right if I didn't come to some panels. So I wasn't really sure exactly what Allyship was. So mainly I came to learn what that means and how to apply that knowledge.
I'm Leah. I work in the Multicultural history program at UF, and what we do is we record oral histories to kind of fill in the gaps of, the history that we're normally taught, which is typically white and cis. And so I guess I'm here because I would really love to know what I can do to be a better listener, so that I can ask the right questions, and to know what the best way is to share these stories that I'm collecting in a way that is useful. I also don't feel like I really don't feel like I've done enough or done anything really as an activist, and I want to learn how to get that.
Thank you for sharing.
My name is Brandon. I'm one of the team who put on this festival and work with Jaron and Narrate. And for me, it's going to pain me when I have to get up and leave and go train some students on a task in a few minutes. But first of all, I want to just say, it might be 2 hours of sleep talking, but listening to everyone here talk, I'm so close to crying. You guys don't even know. This is absolutely this is what this festival is supposed to be about. So thank you. But what I am here to learn in the few minutes that I have is in becoming very close with Jaron over the last 5 years. It's put me face to face with my white privilege, with my male privilege, with my cis privilege, all privilege, period. And through being such close friends with Jaron and learning so much about each other through open dialogue and storytelling and listening, I've learned to be a better ally, and I want to just continue to be a better ally and use my privilege to help others. And I'm like that.
Thank you for sharing.
I will listen to your
Terrible ally.
Hi everyone, I'm Tariel Jones. I'm Jaron's wife. I'm here because he dragged me here, and I'm here because I would like to know how to be a better ally. I feel like I'm a decent ally when it comes to kids, but everyone else, I'm not really sure if I'm that great of an ally, so I need to learn more
Jacob, you want to share?
Yeah. I mean, I'm here because I want to be. So just a continuation of finding ways to use the resources I have available to me, and having this space is a great resource in how to utilize that to,
All right, good stuff. For those who just came in, we just did a brief introduction of who we are. Because we're such a small audience, we get to know each other a little bit more. So if we can introduce ourselves and what we hope to gain from the conversation and dialogue throughout the Allyship panel. And you can pass if you want, but if you want, you can share.
My name is Paul. I'm just here to be a part of the community.
I love it. So.
Yeah, I'm Sam. I was just coming to check it out.
Good stuff. Well, thank you both for sharing. Thank you both for coming. First off, it sounds like everyone is here for the right reasons, which is beautiful. Everyone has a passion to either make sure we're representing each other in the best way, or we're helping the best way that we can, trying to establish those bridges and what those bridges really can sound like. So I guess from the panelists, kind of to start it off, and feel free that if you see something and you realize that you've actually exemplified that or seen it exemplified, to share as well. In terms of, I guess, defining allyship and what it looks like in your field, or if you've seen it modeled appropriately or in a good way, could you share the definition of what you feel allyship is, or that experience that you saw where it was done in a good way?
It starts with shutting the fuck up.
I like that.
Like, really, like being quiet and listening to people. And that can be really hard to do when you maybe have a big personality and you just want to help and you just realize this problem existed that these people have been living with their whole lives, but it's new to you and it's exciting. The most important thing that I've learned, I've gotten really humbled by some really caring people that were like, no, be quiet. And I needed that. And so for me, I honestly think the foundation is to shut up and listen, and everything comes after that.
Thank you for sharing.
I think, so a little bit of context in the higher ed world, the word ally, I don't know if it started in LGBT services, but it certainly was like a calling card that LGBT services really anchored ourselves in. And I think I think that is something for us to be proud of, but simultaneously responsible too, because what I think has happened is we've framed allyship and the evolution of it around identities, and certainly it was attached to LGBT identities. I think over time we've tried to decenter it, but I think as things happen and become more mainstream and become more politically advantageous to use, the word ally has been co-opted by people that want to use it for political leverage. And so and some of this is semantics, right? It doesn't really fucking matter what word you use, it matters how you're showing up. But in terms of like social justice education and in terms of like philosophically thinking about doing the work, having people think and switch their language from allyship to this accomplice, because an accomplice assumes that you're going to do some kind of wrongdoing. Like if you think about an accomplice, it's like, I'm going to be Will's accomplice to I don't know, let's pick something innocuous, like, I don't know.
Well, and
spray painting something,
yeah.
I don't know.
Like I'm from Baltimore, and so we have the Baltimore Uprising,
Yeah.
and we're affected by everyday police brutality.
Right.
And there were white MICA kids, art kids, protesting and going to jail
Right.
on the front lines,
Right.
Getting arrested. So to help protect some folks of color,
Mhm.
they wouldn't,
Right.
And it's you gotta be willing to actually pay up or go to jail.
Right, and there's an element of risk, right?
Yeah.
Because in response to people taking up this allyship as an identity rather than an action. And so, again, it's semantics. It really doesn't matter. You can be an ally and do the same thing that someone would call themselves an accomplice. It's really about like what the work looks like and getting folks to think about what are you doing that involves some level of risk in the work, whether it's financial, some kind of material risk. And that can look different for different folks depending on what kind of work you're engaging in.
Going off of that, I'm a big quotes person, so there's a quote that says, "Well done is better than well said." And so when I think about allyship, I think about actually doing the work. I think about doing it from a place of shutting up, and learning. I think there's that opportunity to learn and to have your own underlying assumptions, your own experiences disturbed and troubled and disrupted and dismantled in some ways. And there's some relearning that happens in the process as well. So allyship is not about a title. It's about actually, doing the work and taking the opportunity to become more aware, to hear what's happening in someone else's world, and then using the opportunities or the privilege that you have to create change in whatever environment. So we all have some influence in some capacity, a scope of influence, sphere of influence. How are we using what we've been given to create change for someone else?
Anyone else here? Have they? Do you all have a definition of allyship by chance, or have seen it modeled in a way that you really resonate with by chance? It's okay if you haven't. We just want to throw it out there so we make sure everyone feels that they know that they have a voice and are empowered. We talked about doing the work, which actually was a topic that came up yesterday in a storytelling the community panel that I was a part of. And several of the attendees wanted to help and wanted to do something in terms of being an ally, but they were fearful that they would harm those that they're trying to help. And so there was this big space of also being afraid to even say that or ask that question. The moderator did a good job of saying, you know what, I'm going to jump out because I'm nervous to ask this question, but I wouldn't be a good moderator if I didn't ask it. And so she actually facilitated that question, which led to good dialogue. So I guess in this space, from your experiences or the things that you've seen, when we're talking about doing the work and trying to help, where should someone begin if they are unfamiliar or afraid that they might do it the wrong way?
I would say the internet. I think, to be honest, I think one of the other parts about doing allyship well is doing your homework yourself. I think a lot of times people are searching out answers that could be very easily answered. And verysmartbrothers.com is a very good blog that has a really good piece on there actually are stupid questions. There is such a thing as stupid questions, and we are in the age with information at our fingertips. You should be Googling stuff first and then seeking the additional information from the experiences of the people around you that maybe contextualizes the information that you get. And so I would say start there and do your own kind of reflection and seek out as much information without asking other people's labor first, particularly of a community that you're not a part of. Right, so in racial justice work as a white person, I'm going to make sure I check with the internet and other white people to get as much information as I can before I go and seek labor or insight from a person of color. Not because their white folks' information is more important, but there's a lot of resources that doesn't require asking a person of color their experience and to teach me. So I would start there. The second piece I'll add, and then I'll shut up, is when it comes to allyship, we're always, and this happens in terms of racial justice with white people in particular, is how can I go help those communities of color? And we forget all the shit that we have to do for our own white community. That's where the work that's what we should just turn around and face our own people first. Listen to what the folks of color say that they need from us. But really, I think at this point, our work is turning around towards our own people and taking care of the stuff there and being willing to take on the risks of doing the work within our own communities. I think the well-intentioned people, white folks in particular, talking about race, are we typically go to the communities of color and say either let me help you or do this, rather than nothing's going to get changed if we don't do the work in our own spaces. So take care of your own people, take care of yourself first, and then take care of your own people first.
I think from my perspective, along with doing some initial research, doing some homework, when I talk with folks about injustices that are directly impacting communities in which I'm a part of, I can typically tell when someone's coming at it from a really genuine place of wanting to learn versus kind of trying to be a little bit more cynical. And so I tend to give a lot of grace in trying to engage with people. Quotes. Another quote that I really like is from Nelson Mandela: "Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world." And so to me, I look at myself as an educator, using education to help shift the way that some people might think about things. And so while doing the research and doing the homework is the first step, I think identifying those who are willing to have those conversations is definitely helpful. And then the other thing that I'm even regularly practicing is making, like, I make mistakes, and how do I not make a mistake that's damaging, but then also learn from that and not let it happen again. And so I think just recognizing that the mistakes are going to come, we're going to say things or do things that do have an impact, and we have to really be cautious around that, but at the same time being prepared to learn from those mistakes, and then using that to educate others. You know, how do you prevent something like that from happening for someone else?
I definitely, self-education is key, number one. Changing the minds of the people that look like you, too. And then, I don't know about here, but in Baltimore, there are a ton of nonprofits. And basically, I tell people, there's already a nonprofit doing something about what you care about. Like, just go help them. Donate your time, donate your money, raise awareness about their cause. You don't have to start your own nonprofit. You don't have to reinvent the wheel and make it about you, you know. And often people in the communities that are affected have their own organizations. And that's what we should be supporting, and we can learn a lot by just showing up and volunteering. You're gonna hear a lot of good information. You're gonna hear what they actually need from you without saying, what do you need, what do you need, what do you need, you know, without actually bothering. So, yeah, someone's already doing the work, and you can just help them do it.
Jaron, I think in your initial question or prompt was around like this fear. It sounds like folks, it was coming from fear, and I think when it comes to like allyship and doing this work is our ego, to be frank. Like, it's so much of like wrestling with our ego and wrestling with the consequences of getting our ego hurt, or the consequences of being embarrassed, or the consequences of getting called out. And if we think earlier to like, that's a risk that they have to be willing to take. There's going to be missteps in this. And if you're doing justice work, I had this conversation earlier with someone, like, sometimes in certain circles of social justice work, there's this like holier than thou mentality that like you have to be perfect. You can't fuck up ever. You can't be misogynistic. You can't like microaggress anybody ever. And you're like, well, then what robot community are you living in?
Right.
Because that's not real life. Yeah. Even those that are the most diligent about our work and ourselves and super critical mess up. It's the condition of being socialized as we are in a Western world. So, I think that's what I'm talking about in terms of like a risk, is you have to put your ego on the line and be willing to make the mistakes and step out, and be willing to face the wrath of people that don't have time for your ego to be out there. That's the part of it too that I think is just really scary and hard. But we need more folks that are willing to put that kind of like ego out there to make change.
Please.
I think the concept of white guilt encapsulates that really well. Like for some people, it's easier to just feel guilty about being white than to just fucking do some work that actually helps people of color. And so if you just like forgive yourself in advance for like, yeah, I'm not going to be perfect the whole time while I'm doing this work, then you're going to waste so much less time and energy when you inevitably fuck up, like take it, listen, do the work, don't do it again, but keep moving forward and keep working, keep improving and keep trying. Because I certainly, and that's something I'm conscious of actually as someone that wants allies. I don't want to shut them all down and say, you suck, go away, and you're the worst feminist ever. Because then, like, why would they ever try again? Yeah. Why would they ever invest their time in what I'm doing again? They're just going to be like, well, if I'm going to be yelled at every time I show up, then I'm going to stop showing up. So it's a balance of like, if you say, hey, you got to do better, well, you do better, and then I'll trust you that you will. Too.
That's the hardest thing for me to balance because where I'm from, there aren't a lot of allies for anything. For any marginalized,
everyone's on the run.
And deter or alienate the people who need to hear it the most. But it's just really hard to educate them and be around it, because I'm not the best one to be talking about anything, a lot of issues and stuff, and even with something that I can relate to, sexism and stuff, like I fail at conveying that properly to people who think feminism is bullshit. Where I'm from, that is mainly what it is. So I don't really how I can, again, I don't want to give a platform to comedians who are going to spew hate, but I also I don't want to alienate them. I don't want them to run and be like, crazy feminist bitch, or anything like that. But, so that's what I would like to do, because it's a lot of people. It's not just a little bit that I can turn away. Sure. I can't turn any of that. Turn away from any of that, or just go over here. For me to have a comedy scene, I have to have comedians there, and there are comedians that really come in there, and ones that, like, their jokes are like, oh, that's too much. Or like, a lot of our conversations when we're workshopping is the language changes and stuff. So it's a very tender subject with people who really don't. They don't care. They don't want to know.
Yes, please.
I'm hearing a lot of things in what you're saying, and one is a lot of negativity and self-doubt, and you are an expert at your own experience. Okay, everybody, and that's a waste of time feeling bad like your family. So forget it. Okay, you know what your experience is like, and you can use that to help identify with other people and help them identify with you. Okay, and then secondly, like, safer space does not mean that there is never a disagreement or a conflict. It means that if shit goes down, someone has someone's back. And so you, in any case that, any place that we are, if there's someone that isn't like getting it, you get on the mic and you tell them, hey, if anyone's harassed here, you talk to me, I have your back. Like, no matter what their jokes are, no matter what they're saying, you can be an ally in a place that feels like a little tense or whatever. You can still bring that and make yourself known and available to people. I don't know if that's really important. I think you can totally do that and get it started, and you'll convert. They easily convert at first, and then it spreads, and that's how movements are made.
I think it goes to that idea of like everyone having some sphere of influence, and so some of that influence can be very direct, very radical, very like in your face. Like, get on the mic and say, "Hey, this is not, okay. I'm here, and I want you all to know that this is not something that I'm going to stand for." And in that moment, you're also calling things out that need to be called out, and exactly. And there are opportunities to engage with your sphere of influence, maybe from a more strategic or subtle way that also creates change. So there are different ways that you can do it, but I have to agree, like, you definitely have something to share, and you definitely have influence, and that's what also gives me a little bit of encouragement when I feel like, how are we going to shift the University of Florida since 1853? I can't carry that. But what I can carry is the influence I have in creating change where I can. So I think it's just something that keeps me motivated that I wanted to share, but it goes off of, what you just mentioned, knowing that you do have a story and a voice and an opportunity.
I guess, like you said earlier, just putting yourself out there, like, you might be on the front lines sometimes. Yeah.
I think it's really easy to get beat down by this kind of work. It's really easy to get tired and raw, and it's Friday. You're like, especially on Fridays.
Not alienate those who need it.
Yeah.
Let them be alienated sometimes.
Well, yeah, I think that's part of the work. It's like some folks' feelings need to get hurt. But what I was thinking is like, and Will introduced me to this like tagline is like, there's moment work and there's movement work, and they're connected. And sometimes allyship gets hyper individualized. And it's good. We need to talk about how we as individuals need to be allies. But when we hyper individualize it, it follows this like capitalist hyper individual. Everything's about the individual. So the individuals are stronger as a collective. And how can you? So maybe this is hypothetical. I'm making up something that might be true for you. Is maybe you want to own a club in the future. How do you think? Well, how do you simultaneously think about the moments, allyship in the moments, but invest in the long game, right? So like I was in MCDA, and my role as an advocate and an ally in that role as a diversity educator and administrator had a certain kind of influence and a certain tone. I now work in central administration. I work in the Vice President's Student Affairs Office, which has both its challenges and its benefits and requires a different kind of tone and presence. And I can't show up as the advocate that I could show up as a diversity educator and advocate, because now I am essentially I'm the man. I am the man. I am at the man's table. And while there's lots, like I feel like a sellout probably every 13 minutes, having a seat at that table allows me to have a different sphere of influence than when I felt like as a diversity person then. It's a little bit different now. I was always on the outside, like chucking stuff, like hopefully they catch it. And now I'm on the inside. I'm like, keep throwing them, and maybe I can catch it. And so for me, that requires sacrifices sometimes, and my soul dying and being rebuilt. So what I'm saying is like building levers that I'm thinking about in the moments. I'm doing as much moment work that I can, but I'm also thinking of the long game, so that maybe not now, but in 10 years, you've made these small sacrifices to build political leverage in your town. That you can maybe in 10 years, because you've thought strategically about building specific partnerships and setting a tone that maybe might not be the most inclusive, but you've set a tone that over time you can expand from, and give yourself some grace that like this shit is hard and lifelong, and think of the long game. That's
right. Yeah, I think the hardest part is feeling like a little dirty about certain things, or you have to like play the game and let certain things. But yeah, critical movement because awesome.
Thank you for sharing. And we're at that point where we start to have a little bit of really good dialogue and sharing with each other. If throughout, from what we've previously discussed, are there any things that have really pulled at you that you may want to ask or discuss? Yes, let's do.
And we talked about how people who want to make the extra step forward and be an ally. We talked about people who are just doing the opposite, that might not be anything at all. But what about the people who are I support this community, but that's the extent of their motivation. So like, how do you actually start there? You need a petition for them to sign.
I have a cynical answer. My cynical answer is that has to benefit them.
Yeah.
In terms of like political work, there has to be for the folks that aren't doing it for like straight up, like they feel moved by it and a moral imperative. For the folks that are kind of like wishy-washy about it, you see this in LGBT movement stuff in particular. Is really any kind of work is like. I wasn't about LGBT folks until my kid was, or my brother was, or my parents was, and then I had a reason to, because it impacted me. It's like whether it's human nature or socialized nature, or we're just selfish, whatever. So for that, like, yeah, I think you're right. It's like a bell curve. There's going to be your early adopters that are like, fuck yeah, we're going to do it because it's the right thing, and then you're going to have people that are like, nope, never going to do it because whatever. And then you have that bell curve in the middle that people are going to opt in at different times for different reasons. A lot of it is like, how does this benefit me? And then you hook them, and then you feed them the Kool-Aid, and then they take it. That's my cynical answer. There's probably more though.
Well, I don't even have much more to say after that, but I think what is important is you've already recognized a good place to spend your energy. Mm-hmm. I think in some ways, and some people may disagree, and I'm okay with that. What can I really do with someone who's just completely anti something? That is just? Is it worth me spending my time and energy trying to move them to the middle, or trying to work with those who are, as you identify, in the middle and move them further along in the work? So I can't really add much more to what LB said, but I think you've definitely identified the right spot to kind of like spend that energy, because that to me is where you're going to find the most opportunity to move people.
I think it depends on the issue too. I feel like there are different priorities depending on what the end goal is. You know, is this some short campaign? Is this one law you're trying to pass? Is this an event? Like, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of different answers depending on what actually is going on. Sure. Because of reasons.
Yeah.
That's really, yes.
I have a question. Do you guys recall a situation where you could have been ally and you didn't, and what would you have done? You made the decision to be an ally in that moment.
I can start, and it feels a little elementary to use this example, but I'm going to share it because it was meaningful for me. I have an older brother with special needs, and there's one word that really I don't take well to. It starts with the R, and we're not going to say the rest of it. But when I was younger and around friends, the word would come up, and I was like, I'm done. Like my day is over. I don't know what else to say, but I didn't say anything in that moment. And I think at that point I felt worse, and I just couldn't even sleep with myself at night because I didn't say anything in the moment. As it happened again, or it happened in the future, I thought to myself, you know what? If I say this and they're mad because I'm calling them out on something that really means a lot to me, that's not someone who I would, really consider a friend. So I said something, and I felt better, and I was able to sleep with myself at night, knowing that even though it was uncomfortable, even though I risked possibly, losing friends or being looked at as the language police or, all that kind of stuff, I didn't care at that point. So I think for me, earlier on, it just making those mistakes and not being an ally or not saying things or not calling things out in the moment, that was challenging. But then as, again, time goes on, I became more confident and became more aware that if I don't say something in that situation, that person may not learn, or they may not know how that is impacting the community of people with disabilities. So that's just
I think that's absolutely it. Most of the times that we are going to encounter oppression is these little moments with friends and family where we should absolutely say, hey, that's super racist, actually. Don't say that. Or, dude, that's really transphobic. What are you doing? That's where we're going to have the most impact. Those are the people that are going to listen to us the most. And that's what's going to happen the most. I'm not going up against the man every day. I cannot dismantle a system on my own later today before dinner. But I can say, whoa, don't say that around me. To anyone that says anything that sounds weird or oppressive, right? And so remembering to do that consistently every time. At first, you're going to be the language police. You're going to be feminazi. Or like for men calling out street crowds, you're going to be called a fag, But like, fags are awesome. Let's all be fags. Whatever. Like, who cares if you call me feminazi? I don't care. I'm standing up for people, and it's totally worth it. And eventually, your friends, they start shutting up and they start listening to you. And it's really cool to see them change because of you just going, hey, dude, don't do that.
The thing I'll add from an example was, so I have two kids. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter and a 3-month-old, and I go by Dad. My daughter calls me Dad. I forget, in allyship conversations, we often forget to talk about like self-allyship and self-advocacy, and that I'm a much better advocate I'd be a better advocate for everybody in this room than I would be for myself. That's probably a pretty common experience. But in this moment, there's often times when we're out in the world, I'm out in the world with my daughter, now that she has a lot of language skills, like a lot of language skills, too much language skills for her 2.5. Sometimes she's wonderful, but she's chatty Cathy. But people sometimes call me mom based on how they interpret my gender. And probably for the first year of her life, I wouldn't correct anybody, to be frank. It was scary, it's risky, and even now I'm pretty selective about who I correct and how I correct it. But now that she has much more consciousness, like that can't happen anymore. Like that can't happen anymore because if I don't correct those people, she'll correct them for me. And so if I'm not standing up for myself, then I'm putting the responsibility of my child to advocate for me, which is like not fair, and it's not her job. And it's not putting up boundaries about who I am in her world, because if someone gets to question who I am, that questions her world, and that's not okay. And so in a kind of like roundabout way, I've had to be better about advocating for myself around my own like genderqueer identity, to be a better ally for both myself and for my daughter, who has to grow up with parents that are outside of the norm. And then all of the other countless times that my family and other white people say racist shit or sexist shit or homophobic shit that I just didn't. There's not enough minutes in the day to count how many times I've not said anything.
Yeah.
But that's in the past, and we'll move forward and try to do better. So, your hand was up.
I was just going to mention how do you deal specifically with family? You can't always run from friends. You can make friends. Family, you might, ignore or whatever, but it's going to come up at some point, even if you're talking about 10 years.
There's some good stuff. So in Baltimore, we have a Surge chapter, right? It's something.
Showing up
for racial justice. Thank you. I just did one of those. And so I've learned some stuff from them and the color that they are accountable to, and the work that they do. And a lot of it is just like, there are skills of how do you win anyone over to your side. It's like, and you can Google it, you can find it, right? And it's just personalizing an issue. Like my grandma totally thinks every nationality of person and gender are terrible drivers. Like, so, they must be Chinese. Oh, they must be a woman. They must be, like, and I'm just like, you can't see who. And so I literally have to be like, that's not my experience. I've been in the car with a Chinese person and they drove fine. Like, it's so weird. You have to verbalize something like that, but she needs to hear it that way. Actually, all the Chinese people I work with are really cool, or whatever it is that goes up against what she's saying. And so just talking about your own experience, that's harder to argue with than saying, nuh-uh, And there's other stuff like that too, I'm sure you guys know.
That's good.
Just asking them why they think something and prompting them to really stop and try to verbalize why they have this bias towards something, to say that loud. Does that ever work as a tactic? Because it's working with my dad. I'm going to say something racist, and he doesn't think he's racist. And like, well, why do you really think that? And say, well, I just do. Tell me why. That's that broad, can't answer.
Yeah. But I'm hearing you're saying calm. You're coming from a place of genuine interest. People can tell when you're like, well, why? So if you're really interested and you really want to hear them and you stay calm, they're going to be willing to tell you and open themselves up and reveal, oh, they don't actually know why. But keeping it personal and
the thing I'll add is like, I differentiate between, there's a different threshold between what shit I'll put up with when it comes to my privileged identities and what shit I'll put up with my marginalized identities. So like as a white person around race, my threshold is pretty high around shit that I'll calmly try to have a conversation about, because my responsibility as a white person to the racial justice stuff is much higher versus some like homophobic or genderphobic or sexist shit that you're like, as a person that fits into that marginalized category, my threshold is much lower and personal. I'm like, no, stop doing this or I will leave the room. So the like staying calm, but that's been a skill for me to have to like realize that my responsibility for the different conversations, the thresholds are going to be a difference, and it's okay to like be like, sometimes, and this is more for like your marginalized, like put up with less shit. Like, I'm going to leave the room if you say this like this one more time, I'm going to leave the room. And if you have people that care about you, sometimes that's a good motivator to like at least stop saying that shitty thing. That's worked a couple times for me. It's like, all right, you said that, I don't like it because of this. You said it again. If you say it again, I'm gonna leave the room. I'm not gonna like not talk to you for 10 years, but there's lots of good reasons for people not to talk to people for 10 years. Let me not minimize that. But so I think for me, when it comes to like allyship, I've had to really like differentiate the thresholds to be effective in it, and what people can see, and who I'm responsible to and who I'm responsible for.
Humor's good too.
Yeah.
My grandma was concerned that Obama was putting up fences to create death camps, like the Nazis, but for white people. And I said, but don't you want a border wall between us and Mexico? Isn't that exactly what you want? And she was like, and then she shut up. You know.
Plant the seed.
Yeah.
That's hypocrisy.
Yeah, and I can say, she says something fucked up, and I can, home for Christmas, I can turn to my younger cousin and be like, you know that's racist, right? And he's like, yeah, I know. I'm like, okay. So I don't even talk to her. Mm-hmm. I just demonstrate to her, like, this isn't okay. I'm telling my cousin, no, don't listen to you.
Anyone else have anything that has kind of like, I kind of pulled at them that they would hope that we could contribute or start a dialogue around from what we've heard, or anything just came up within the context? Cool. Well, I have a question. All right, so we're talking about allyship, and we're at that point where we said we're gonna do the work. We're gonna figure out what it is or how to do it. We have no clue, but I'm going to help these people. Now, we've seen that that's probably not the best approach to just say I'm going to help these people. What are some of the best approaches for making sure that you're helping the right way? And I guess I'll start off of an example that I saw. So I was talking to the chief diversity officer for San Jose State University, and she was mentioning how there was an organization that wanted to help people of color in higher administration. And they said, we want, the organization came in and tried, the people who were trying to be allies came to them and said, we're going to give you this platform, we're going to give you a seat at the table, and that's going to work, right? And the organization who, the organization with people of color, they said, actually, what we need from you is every month we have meetings. And most of the time, the majority of us can't make it because we have families. So for you to be a better ally for us, can you provide childcare once a month so that we can meet to do the work that we need to do? And they were just like, huh.
That doesn't give me the glory.
But right. And so there was a moment where it was like, so how do we say we help? You say you provided childcare so that this, that, and the third could happen. So it was an epiphany for them to say, this is a form of allyship. This is doing the work. Have there been other situations that you've seen or experienced where maybe someone tried to tell what that group needed, or where the group and the person who's trying to be an ally actually did the right way together? Have we seen any examples of that? Because I think we kind of have both sides trying to figure out how do we do it together.
I think there's something to what you just mentioned around looking at allyship not from a place of this person is at a deficit, but more so we need to address the system and the structures that prevent someone from being able to succeed. And I'm kind of taking it more from like an educational, working in higher education perspective, but I think oftentimes we look so much at, again, let's talk about this idea of like in the achievement gap in education. So there's an achievement gap for a particular population, and I want to be an ally to help young Black boys. Could we flip that and look at the opportunity gap that exists rather than looking at the achievement of the actual individual students or the actual group? So can we look at the opportunities that exist or the barriers that are in place that prevent this group specifically from achieving from a larger historical, social, political lens? So I think what you were mentioning around giving people the resources so they now have access, that's not looking at this person being at a deficit or this group of people being at a deficit, but more so looking at increasing opportunities or increasing access, which I don't think we do enough strategic exploration or have enough dialogue or conversations about looking at barriers and not looking at people from a deficit standpoint in allyship.
Just thinking about your question in terms of examples.
I have an example of when
please.
I did it terribly.
Sure, yes.
Like, I feel like one day I felt like I discovered social justice. And I was like, oh, like I Columbus did, like straight up. I Columbus social justice. And I was like, well, you know, I should really put on a conference. And I should invite all these speakers, and I should put on this giant event, because people in Baltimore need to know about these issues. And through some very kind and patient people, they helped me realize, they just asked me questions. Why do you want to take this on? Why do you feel like you can bring all these people together to have this conference? Why do you think blah, blah, blah? And then I realized that, like, all these people were already doing the work, and there's nothing I could add to that conversation, because it was already happening, and it's like I wanted the credit, and I thought no one else knew what was going on. So I've been humbled a lot, which I think I need as a white person especially, but it's really important to just know that there are other people doing it, and that you can just help them and truly listen. So when those folks said, well, we need childcare, they provided childcare, right?
Mm-hmm. They did.
So they did it. They did the thing. They listened, and then they did the thing that was necessary. And you don't always know what it is, but that's the point of listening. You are not going to know in advance necessarily what that group of people needs, but they'll tell you.
Yeah, and especially in talking about listening, I think it's very important that we also remember that when you're listening for the needs of a community, to get as many stories as you can, to talk to as many people as you can, because everyone has a different lived experience. And so you don't want to find yourself almost tokenizing an experience because you listen to one story and you think that that's the whole reality of a whole population. And so from that dialogue, from those conversations, you'll also start to understand how you can contribute, whether it is a stand-up performance or whether it is trying to figure out how to get them on stage, and so, but it's just based off of what they need. And so just it starts with the conversation. And I think that it's more important than ever right now because it's so divisive. We're not practicing how to have conversations when they're difficult, because it's so easy to stay in your space and the internet will connect you with people who agree with your thought and opinion, so much that you'll think that the majority of the world thinks in this narrow-minded way, and so I think it's about having those conversations and listening.
I don't have any like organizational examples, probably because we haven't figured out organizationally like how to do it well, which is sad. I've been trying to rack my brain. I think one of the hardest pieces for me to navigate, and this was when I was in my LGBT role, is when we're talking about allyship from like an intersectional place. So I was working with a colleague at the time who's no longer there, who ran our Black Affairs office, and our Black LGBT students were not finding that space to be supportive, and we're feeling some experiences that seemed homophobic or transphobic in those spaces, and figuring out how to be an ally to them, but as a white person. And I don't even have like a clear, good answer, to be honest. This is like the really sticky places, is when we start to get in these intersectional places where you want to be an ally, but you might not be the best place to be the mouthpiece of it. And then you have to start thinking creatively. You have to start thinking, like, what is your capacity to be an ally to that student when you're connecting around, like, yeah, I can connect to you around the experience of in your LGBTQ identity, but as a white person in this conversation within that community, my capacity to advocate for you has limitations, and it might not be, I might not be the appropriate advocate for you. So that, and I'm not sure,
That's a
there are
good place
some
to
missteps.
be, though. That's an egoless way to think about and go to Vietnam.
Yeah, so in terms of I think I probably did some missteps, to be frank. I probably did a lot of inaction at the time, other than being very individually supportive. I just support you. This space that I'm trying to create is as supportive as you as possible. But thinking about key strategic partnerships with folks within that community that could have impacted, because while there was maybe certain parts of that community that were not being supportive, there was certainly lots of other parts of that community that were supportive. And it was my job then to go out and seek those resources. And I probably could have done a better job. But that's been in some of the hard, in terms of outside of my own work and the work of doing the self stuff, is around the intersectional pieces when you're navigating both a marginalized identity and a privileged one. It's really, really hard. It's messy. It's super messy. Yeah.
I'd say our best volunteer at Calabac Sophomore is this dude named Matt. This is head white dude. He shows up to every event. He always says, "Do you need anything? Do you share anything?" He donates a little bit extra money every month just in case we need more postcards printed, they're not as famous. And he's just there. And I can literally, if I'm about to do a workshop and I didn't eat, I can be like, "Can you go next door and just give me something to eat? Because I'm about to die." And he'll be like, "Yo, what do you want?" "Okay, cool, got it." That's my dude voice. And sometimes that is what is necessary. He by doing that, he's facilitating Calabac doing an event on street harassment because I needed a fucking sandwich, so I could get through the thing. And that's really real. Yeah. And so, really, it's just, he just shows up consistently. He shows up and he's quiet and he doesn't talk unless I specifically make him talk to people about stuff. But I think that's the most important thing.
I did have something that kind of crossed my mind. I know your question was earlier about how could someone need an ally and they were one. I think that there's a lot to also learn from when you needed an ally and you didn't have one, what that felt like. Because from being on that other side, I think it would also help others understand the importance or help them feel the emotional part of those who are in need of allyship. So I can share an example of a time that I needed an ally and what that felt like. And I think that it will also help those who may be at that space where I could be an ally, but I don't know what. Sharing those experiences, you kind of pull from, this might be something that I could have helped to contribute with. So my story, because I'm a story guy, actually is the story that about when I first realized that race and racism was something that could be very harmful or not the best thing in the world, right? I grew up in a very small rural town, Winterville, North Carolina. It doesn't snow much, but it's cold. And we did not know as a neighborhood or even notice that geographically there was a railroad track that separated the town. And the elementary school that the town went to was right on the railroad track. We crossed them every day. So though our communities were separated, we all went to school together. And as children, we didn't even notice that there was a difference of, invisible lines. We didn't know what that was. Until first grade. I'll never forget it. We as a group used to play football all the time at recess. And one group would always have the football and we'd all come together and play, no problem. We didn't know, it was more neighborhood versus neighborhood, but it was still all fun. We switched sides, but it just naturally went that way. It just happened to be that it was one side that was majority black kids and one side majority white kids. But even in that space, we never felt like it was black versus white or anything. It was really, it honestly was community. Until the first grade. And we had a friend of ours say that we could no longer play with their football because their mom said that they smelled black. Now, I had no idea what that meant, but it didn't feel good. And I lived a block away from school, so I went and asked the teacher, could I go to the bathroom? And I ran home crying because I didn't know what this was, but it felt dirty, it felt ugly, it felt wrong. And I felt that it was something wrong with me and whatever the word black. I'd never been taught that was anything other than awesome. So that at that point, that's when my family realized, okay, it's time for the talk. And my grandmother called my mother. My mother came in, and my grandfather, my grandmother, and my mother sat me down. And this is something that I know was a privilege of mine, that I had the family that could handle that conversation in a way that didn't allow me to form hatred towards someone. And that's not always the case. So I recognize that privilege of having that opportunity of a family that navigated me through that experience to help me understand that there are communities that just don't get it right or may not think the right way. But it's never a reflection of who you are as an individual and your skin color and your people. We are all human beings. But understand that there are systems, there are things that you will have to overcome and you may need an ally for. And in this case, I will never forget the image. At that moment when he said he smelled black, that's where I saw race. And I saw all of my black friends behind me, and I saw all of my white friends in front of me, and no one from the white side said that he was wrong. And I just would have wanted someone to at least say, that's wrong, or that's not right. And in the first grade, that would have at least been like, okay, like, good, because I'm confused and I'm dealing with this. And for several of my friends, they never got to process that in a healthy way, and it became hatred or distrust, or they were never friends again. And that's part of the reason why I still do the diversity and inclusion work that I do today, is because I was privileged to have the family that would help me to say, you might have to be an advocate, you might have to be a bridger, you might have to, be uncomfortable, but get comfortable being uncomfortable, because if it's going to get better, you have to do that. So for me, needing an ally, I didn't need anyone to be, Superman or Superwoman. I just needed somebody to, in that space, let me know that I had a friend, or I had someone who would be there, even if it was just a look or a comment. Because in that space, I didn't know what to do. So, yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
I'll share a story about a time professionally I needed an ally, and it was also centered on race. And so I was at a previous institution, and it was in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, literally in the middle of cornfields. And I was going into the office, and my office was in the student union. I was dressed pretty, similar to how I'm dressed now. And for context, I'm 6'8". So when you see me, I stand up. LB and I are like looking eye to eye right now, but I promise you when I stand up, it's a totally different story. So I'm 6'8". I have actually never played basketball. Shocker. Yeah. So I've never played any sport. So my height, my size, I'm going to put it out there, my race, all informs how people see my body when I walk into a room. And so it's going into work, first thing in the morning. There were some renovations happening in the building. Some folks were working on the renovations, yell out to me literally from across the room, hey, the court is that way. And I'm just like, I at that moment, and that had, like, I've gotten the question, do you play basketball? How tall are you? That doesn't really bother me. I get it all the time. But the blatant, like, your worth or like where you're supposed to be is on a basketball court, I couldn't even respond. At that moment, I didn't have the energy, I didn't have the capacity. didn't have the emotional stability to be able to engage. I just kept going. I couldn't even do it. But at that moment, I think for me, I needed someone to challenge that. And maybe it happened afterwards. I don't know. But all I could do was just give a look, shake my head, and keep going to work. But the fact that there was nothing there there was no ally. I didn't feel like I had an ally in that moment. I still had to do my job. Still had to, go in about my day and show up. Even after that thing happened to me, first thing in the morning when I really just wanted to go home and be frustrated and be angry, I couldn't. So I think that to me is an example of when I really wish there was an ally around. But in some ways, we learned to, unfortunately, grapple with that and sit in it. And it's not ideal, but it's a sad reality.
Did you share it with any of your colleagues that day?
No.
So there wasn't like a work environment that felt like conducive to that?
No. I'll tell you more about that later. Yeah, no. It was a situation where I think had I shared with colleagues, I was the only black person in the office as well. Will's pulling the race card. I didn't have the energy to deal with that either.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel your frustration years later.
Yeah,
it's like a pretty raw place.
Yes.
Yeah.
So research shows that the first person you tell a traumatic experience to, we were talking about this in our earlier workshop about bystander intervention and how to intervene in heat harassment of any kind. But the first person you share your story with, how they react affects how you process that event. So to be a good ally, one thing you can do is if you were to say, this guy yelled at me about the court's that way today, if I was like, oh, get over it, race card, obviously it's going to make that one event even worse. It's going to magnify that one statement for him. But if I was like, oh, that's terrible, I'm so sorry, if I use active listening skills, if I mirror your language, like, oh, that would drive me nuts, like, I'm really sorry that happened to you, are you okay, do you need anything, if I do that, if I'm supportive, it's going to be a lot easier for him to process that thing and heal from it a bit faster. And so that's like a scientific study things out there. So I definitely recommend one great way to be an ally is just believe people, right? Listen to them, believe them. Be a person that you could. I wish there was someone in your office that day, right? That you could share your story with. They make themselves known, right?
Like that little, what that story that you said. There's a lot of people where I live who would consider that like a no. Because I am very attuned to the microaggressions as a woman that people kind of tell me to get over, like that's how they feel and stuff, and like so where I like the idea of asking somebody what have you ever needed an ally before, where I feel like I've met with a lot of like people who don't necessarily have like straight white guy, like what would he consider like a time where he needed an ally and stuff, like how do I get them to be able to relate to those little like microaggressions that build up, and like it like every time something like that happens it's just heavy because they don't, like, a lot of people don't see it, but they're just it's an issue.
I think you bring up a good point of connecting experiences or emotions, and that can sometimes be difficult. I went to INCOR last year, Will and I, and there was a workshop that I did where we really had to find someone we did not know, which was pretty easy in this big space. And so I was partnered up with a straight white man, religious, and I just did not know what I was going to have to share, And so the facilitator looks at us and he says, talk about a time where you felt silenced or you couldn't express yourself. And from what he shared was an experience that I never even had thought about because I hadn't heard a story from his perspective. And he was saying that he feels that he's not bringing his whole self into conversations because he's fearful that he may say something the wrong way that might offend someone or actually hurt his career, when his intention is never to hurt or harm. It might come from lack of education, which is why he was at NCORE, which is a national conference on race and ethnicity in higher education. And I was sitting there and I was like, man, like, I was able to hear him feel like he's not bringing his whole self to the space. He was able to provide that context, and then I was able to provide my perspective from being in, a population that sometimes might be marginalized, and say, what you just said, I resonate with that, and I share that in many of the spaces that I go into. And so we start to realize that though there are several differences, there are similarities, but if we don't have the dialogue or start the conversation, we may never know those things. And so sometimes it is empowering the group that probably needs to implement different practices, figuring out some way to get them to almost be empowered to say, oh, I made the connection. Because sometimes they feel like, if I made the connection, and it's like, oh yeah, well, let's do this. And then it's like, strategic, I'm, actually got you to.
Let them think it was their idea.
Right,
yeah.
right. But also making sure that they're honoring those who you're actually trying to help. That was just something that kind of was unexpected from that space. And it was with someone that I really wasn't sure that we would be able to have something in common with, or how I would be able to express my frustration, my feeling of silence. Then I found that there are examples where we all have those human feelings of being alone, of feeling like we need someone. And so thinking outside of the box of not just, race, not just sexual orientation and religion, like there are other things that we can find those examples, and that can start the conversation.
So right now, Multicultural is one person. So there's not a lot I can do, right? Like, unless I actually try to get more involved. But over the years, it's been a lot of different things, and we've interacted in different ways with organizations. But I realized that I can't ask anyone else to show up to my event until I had already been showing up to theirs. I had to already show support for our large trans community and support the people of color, and once they could trust that I would keep showing up, then I could say, I'd also like to do an event. I'd love your input on it. And they, we had a relationship already, but because I'm the one coming in with privilege, I had to make that relationship happen. Like, I had to be there first. So that's what I did. And then once you do that, like, you can just partner and build off each other. And yeah, you just want to make sure that you're not speaking for anyone, that you are representing people. But something that's always struck me, someone told me once that, like, it'd be so cool if every project or every room had one of every type of, every identity, so everyone's voices are like it's not gonna happen, it's not realistic. And so technically you could actually do very good anti-oppression work even if no one from that identity is in the room, if you've done your fucking homework and if you listen and you get out there, you can still do a good job, and you don't need a token to prove it to everyone else that you're doing a good job. Just do a good job, right? But it comes from having relationships, building on that, listening, showing up, all of that stuff.
I think it's also powerful when you name that one person's experience is not essential to the entire identity. And so when you think about how you won't be able to have someone to represent every identity, because identities are also intersectional. And so just even being able to put it out there from the very beginning, that helps whoever is the recipient of the information understand this is just Will's narrative, but Will doesn't speak for an entire community or an entire population. But I agree, building the relationship first before asking someone to be a part of something, but then also even helping someone understand what the end goal of their participation is going to be. That's also helpful. So I think for me, the best thing to do is just name the fact that this person can't speak or does not speak for an entire community or population, and this is what I've taken from this one person or this small group's narrative.
I think it's also to build off what both of you said. In the event that you have one, know that one person has friends or a community that they have conversations with. So if you have that one, ask them, is there anyone else I can speak with? Are there other stories that I can hear from? Are there other communities that I should be asking? And so it's almost like, the first Google search, there's tons of pages. There are tons of people and tons of experiences that are right there. If you have that one, ask who are your other connections? Who else can I speak to? I'm looking at it from an educational standpoint in terms of like qualitative research. Understanding that if you hear that one story, you're also reporting that story based off of your bias. And so as a researcher, you have to talk about what your bias is. I received it this way because of this is my lived experience, my privilege, etc. But also you may want a member check. So if you have that one experience, curiously asking the question, am I getting this right? Did I hear you correctly when you said this, that, and the third? And so if you have that one story, sharing that this isn't the experience of a whole population, but also if you share that experience, making sure that it honors the storyteller, that's very important. Because the worst thing you can do is think that you're reporting on something and then that person reads it, it's like, this isn't why I signed up for this. This isn't, I don't like this, and so you want to honor that because that will give you access to more resources from their community as well.
Yeah, and I think this has been said in a couple different ways. You're approaching their involvement from a place of investment rather than use. So I think a lot of times people are like, well, I'm going to use your experience to better our organization, to make us seem more conscious than we are, and then like when we're done using you, like there's no investment from this organization or these people in that person. They're done. So what is actually like investing in that person as part of your organization look like? And then asking yourself as the organization, what is this program or who is this program for? Like, is it to make us look good? Is it actually serving the audience or the people that you're attempting to, like, again, are you using it for the benefit of the organization or the people, or are you actually investing in it? And so I think that the direction of the involvement matters most, because then one is generative and one is like reductive.
And when I walk into really privileged spaces, or people, that look like me, I try to bring in the stories of people I've spoken with to the room. Not speaking for them, but sharing those stories. I'm not upset, I'm just coughing, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Terrible. But I'll walk into a college classroom and start talking about street harassment to people that maybe have never met a trans person. And I need to tell them, like, harassment is different for a trans man than it is for me, and we need to talk about what that means, and I give examples because I've talked to trans men and they can tell me what those examples of harassment are. And so I can bring their voice into the room and never like forget about that, like bring all those stories with me too, and help that inform the work that I do. And then you just have to remember to not stagnate. Keep learning, keep talking. Like, as long as you know that you will never know anything and you will make mistakes, then learning and growing doesn't seem like such a daunting task. It's just what you do. You just keep learning and taking in new information. So as long as you keep doing that, the communities will help. They'll inform you about what they need and what they're focusing on now. And you can just assist. That's the basketball.
That's actually pretty good. That was a pretty.
I wouldn't know.
That's a good shot. So, from a basketball player, who loves it, I will say that was a great assist. We're gonna bring it on home, buzzer beater, because we are actually out of time. See what I did there? We made it work. But yeah, we're past 5 o'clock. But I just want everyone to give each other a round of applause for having this conversation. Thank you for the panelists. Thank you for everyone that's been a part of this discussion. This is the type of work that we want to continue with Changeville and will continue to happen in our communities. And I hope we're able to find things we can take back. Know that we are always a resource, even like the people on the panel. Google us. Our contact information is everywhere. Trust me. But this is the type of work that we love to do. We love to build community. Also, the Bull. Spaces like this happen all the time. He creates a space where anyone can get on stage and can have a voice. And we have very deep conversations in here. So maybe we create those spaces back in our hometown. But thank you all again. I also know we have a lot of excellent things that are going on for the rest of the night. So I don't want to keep you all from the virtual reality stuff, the concerts. But again, thank you all for coming. And hope to see you all again later on today, tonight, or even next year. Thank you.